So, here we are, our second week with our new format, where what we're here to talk about is how to apply spiritual principle to the real world, to what's going on around us, how we apply it to the things that might hurt the most. And so what I've done is I've picked up the top stories of the week. Now, there are many in our movement who never look at the news because they're afraid of the negativity. They look away from it. They don't want to be a part of it. They don't want to be they think it's separate. It's out there. Let's turn away and let's just be positive. But I say, let us embrace the world for what it is and then look beyond it. Let us take on what's really going on in the world and then see the truth that goes beyond what is happening. And so these are the top headlines for this week. The first one is the U.S. says Russia tested missiles, violating the 1987 treaty, and U.S. and Europe set to toughen Russian sanctions. This could bring up a lot of fear. It can feel like such a threat, and it may actually be. Russia may actually attack. It's actually possible. So this is something real in our world that's happening. But how do we apply spiritual principle to this? How do we come into this? Because isn't it true that within ourselves, we feel threatened sometimes? That there's a part of ourselves that sets off missiles inside ourselves? That how do we come to this that's out here in the world without first addressing what's inside us? The struggle, the threat, the way we get tough on ourselves instead of loving ourselves. And so this is going on out here. But as Carol said earlier in the day, everything out here is a metaphor for something that's happening in here. And everything in here is a metaphor for something going on out here. If it's true, what we say as spiritual principle in the science of mind, we say that whatever we embody shows up in physical form. It's not just what we think. What we think feeds what we believe. What we believe feeds what we embody. What we embody is the totality of who we are, which includes our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our beliefs, and those unconscious areas. This is conscious and unconscious. That also includes those parts of us that have taken on the race consciousness. And what I mean by race consciousness is we simply believe certain things because everybody else does. We grew up believing it. And so it's become a part of course, what we call realistic. But all those things come together as a totality for what we embody. And it's that reflects back to us instantly. So I say to you today that if we were to stand in a place of peace, truly embodying peace, then what would happen here is there would be peace in the world. That we can actually change. Now, there have been people throughout history who have made that kind of stance. Gandhi. When Gandhi first came up with the idea of active, peaceful resistance, people thought he was crazy. When he went out there and took the beatings he took, people laughed at him and thought he was a fool. And yet because of him, the entire consciousness of we didn't just shift how the country didn't just become free. The entire consciousness of how we view life shifted. Mother Teresa, who went and served the poor for 50 years, changed how we see life, how everyone sees life. The Dalai Lama, these people actually have changed the entire view of the world for all of us. And the thing about it is, any one of us can do that. If we are willing to stand in that place of our consciousness makes a difference. And when we stand in that place of our consciousness makes a difference, then all of a sudden, what actions to take? Show up. What actions to take from that place of consciousness? Giving to the Red Cross, writing a letter, making a stand. You never know. When I wanted to start this center, I didn't have a clue how to do it. I just had the vision that this center should be realized. I didn't have a clue how to make this happen. And yet, by sitting in the consciousness that of course this would come about, it has, and here we are. And that is true for everything. And so when we look at Russia and the US and Europe starting to go at each other, it is up to us in our consciousness to know that it is absolutely possible for them to find a way to have peace. For them to find a way so that we don't need to go to war. We don't need to have sanctions. Now, if what we do is take sides, then we are adding to the conflict. But the side to take is of peace, and knowing that, of course, there's a way this can work out for the better good of all of us. Without knowing that, then it's not possible. But if more of us know the truth, then of course it is possible. And these kinds of things shift all the time. Who wants to weigh in?
Yeah, it is difficult seeing these headlines and these stories, and it does trigger definitely things within me. And I love what you said that Carol shared about it being a metaphor, that what happens outside is also what happens inside. I mean, it truly is a mirror. If there's conflict outside, I mean, there's definitely the truth within me. I have conflict inside myself. And so it's an opportunity for me to look deeply within myself and address that conflict. And so that's one thing I recognize in what we're discussing today, which I appreciate. Also, something else that came up for me, and I know the Dalai Lama said this, and Martin Luther King said this, in that you can't step out war with war, only peace can do that. You can't step out, you can't get rid of hatred with hatred. Only love can do that. And that is such a profound truth and teaching. And I'm taking a class right now on Buddhism, and it's really about coming forth with compassion and loving kindness. And if we really want to see a change in this world, that's really where it needs to start from and come from. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. We got to start somewhere. And the best place always to start is within ourselves. And then you never know where it can go from there. All right, let's move on to the next story here. When cell doors open, tough tactics and risk. These are real headlines from the newspaper. This particular story was about how many people die in prison and the brutality that people in prison go through. The statistics are rather high in terms of, they were saying that somewhere, it was really quite an extraordinary statistic as to how many prisoners are brutalized by guards and how seldom it's actually necessary when the circumstances of the whole thing show themselves. There's a lot of lawsuits going on around that. There's a lot of passion going on around that. There's a lot of upset going on around that. People are being brutalized. Now, some may say, well, they deserve it. If they weren't criminals, they wouldn't be in jail, and they don't deserve it. They wouldn't deserve it. But they're in jail, so they deserve it. Others would say, this is incredibly harsh treatment. But what do we say when we look at spiritual principle? I look at how I beat myself up, how I brutalize myself. That is the consciousness I am bringing into the world. That if no one brutalized themselves, if we all embodied a place of self-love, there would be no place for something like this to even happen. It couldn't exist. But it does exist because we brutalize ourselves. And so it always starts from the same place. That place within. The article focused on this one man who shouldn't have even been in prison. Turned out he was mentally ill and belonged in a facility, so was just being held over in prison and was acting out because he was mentally, he's mentally disabled, and they went in and choked him to death. And it's on video. I mean, it's not like somebody made this stuff up. I mean, it's all on video. And I could get really upset about that. And I am. I mean, I'm certainly very upset that something like that happens. So it's not like, it's a very upsetting thing. And yet what it has to come back to is, if I want to see that change, I have to remember what Gandhi always said, which is be the change I want to see in the world. I have to stop being willing to brutalize myself. You have to stop being willing to brutalize yourself. Who wants to weigh in about this? Kaz.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, because I think the old adage of, would you speak to others the way you speak to yourself in your
Right.
in your mind, and no one could be harder on me than I ever have been hard on myself. No one could be harder on me than I've been on myself in the past, and I'm learning to be much gentler with myself. But the change starts with you. The change absolutely starts with you. And once you get to a place that you're ready to change, then you radiate that. And that changes the circumstances and the situations and the people around you. I remember talking to one of my teachers when I was in practitioner training, and I said, you said we can't change others. And he said, well, that's really not true. You can't go and say, well, Cliff, you need to change. Ashley can't go to you and say, Cliff, I don't like this about you. This doesn't work. You need to change. But Ashley can live in such an exemplary way and live by example. And you're seeing that in her, that you go, wow, that really resonates with me. So I want to explore what that means for me and how I can change. And that's the way that we do change other people. We don't tell them that they need to change or how they need to change. We just live by example. And if you've ever been to a prison or a place where people are incarcerated, it's amazing how the stories that they tell of how they ended up there. And that, many people that I've known, including myself, were probably on that. It could, sometimes things can go any way. They can go either way. You could have been in your car and, it was sometime had a little bit too much to drink and you didn't get pulled over. But this other person did, and they ended up, it's, our lives are very much, we're so much a choice that the choices that we make really determine what happens to us. So starting with speaking lovingly to ourselves, to making the right choices, to being the change that we want to see in the world.
Yeah. It's incredible. My grandfather used to take homeless people off the street and feed them. And when I was very young at the time, and I asked him why he did that. He said, because it's only one choice away from me being that. From me being that person. And so, here we are looking at how to change ourselves, how to change our environment, how to change our lives, and how to affect the world. Because if we actually change our lives, we are affecting change in the world. If we are living a life worth living, we are actually affecting change that ripples out. It's that butterfly effect thing. how a butterfly, the size is there where a butterfly's wings can actually create a tsunami and the other end of the planet. And it's like, that's what we do when we live a life worth living. When we live from that place of compassion and kindness. When we live from that place of caring for ourselves as well as others. And it always starts with caring for ourselves first. What does that look like? Are we taking action and doing those things coming from our own center that shows caring for ourselves? Does anybody else want to weigh in on this one? Anybody? Okay. On to the next one. Paying ransoms, Europe bankrolls Al-Qaeda terror. This was an article about how when people are kidnapped, the United States has a stand for not paying kidnappers, where Europe actually does pay kidnappers. And what I thought about this was how whatever stand we make, we could get on the right and wrong. We could say, well, the United States is right not to pay terrorists, not to pay ransom for kidnappers. Or others will say Europe's right. So we could, again, get on either side of an issue instead of standing in what's true. Now, all I went to around this is what if it was my kid? What if my kid was kidnapped? Where would I be about this? And the thing that I remembered most about this is I still need to stand in spiritual principle. I can't just put out the window and panic if it's my kid. In fact, that's the time to stand in spiritual principle, as if it's my kid, right? Dr. Holmes said to abandon the truth in our hour of need is to not understand the truth. So if my kid's kidnapped, I want to make sure that I'm standing in spiritual principle, because that's his best bet. My son's best bet of getting home safely is me standing in spiritual principle. Whether I pay the ransom or not. His best bet in getting home in how I stand about him getting home. Not whether the ransom is paid or not. And that was the thing about it. Was from that place standing in truth, I may come to I may get deep enough with the whole thing to know. Because this is another thing we talk about here, and we talk about this all the time, is getting to that place of knowing where you're not guessing, where you know what it is that's yours to do. You have this question around here, which is this mine to do? And you ask yourself that question. And if you don't get a full knowing, you know it's yours. If you're confused or you're not sure or whatever, then it's not yours to do yet. It's not yours to do until you know it's yours to do. And the best way to know what's yours to do is to get solid in the truth. To get solid in that place of knowing. And the best way to do that is to get solid in our spiritual practice. The other day, a few weeks ago, I realized when I was doing this, I was upset about something and I was doing my spiritual practice. And I wasn't getting to a place of calm. And I was getting more and more upset because I wasn't getting to that place of calm while I'm doing my spiritual practice. I'm like, why isn't this working? And then I realized that the fact that how I was spending my time was doing the spiritual practice was in and of itself keeping myself on track. Whether I got to that place of calm or not, I was at least on the right track because I was doing my spiritual practice. And then once I got to that, then I started calming down. So getting to a place where we remember spiritual practice, whatever your spiritual practice is a powerful place to be, especially when something goes as wrong as your kid's been kidnapped. Someone you love has been grabbed. The last place you want to do is take sides as to whether the ransom should be paid or not. What you want to do is simply know he's safe. I ran over, years ago when my dog Bella was a puppy, I ran over her head with my car. And got so freaked out, I stopped the car, got out of the car, and her head was literally underneath the tire. And so I pulled the car, I backed up the car, got it off the dog, looked at my dog, took my dog's head and looked her square in the eyes and said, "You are in perfect health." And knew it. Then rushed her down to the vet. They took an x-ray and said, "She's fine. There's nothing wrong with this dog." Now you would think with a car sitting on top of her head that would be impossible. But I am so certain that it is how well we can know the truth. And how that actually plays out in our lives. This is no guessing game for me. This is what I have done time after time after time again. Simply stand. And when we do, things shift in ways that others would call, that's not realistic. And yet, here I am with dinner. Who wants to weigh in? Yes, Carol.
I looked at this different from earlier today, and I was thinking how I pay ransoms to things that don't benefit the world, things that kind of terrorize the world. You know, how do my judgments work? How does me, you know, thinking that either I'm not good enough or they're not good enough to deal with what I think should be. How am I kidnapping and ransoming the truth? How am I taking away from energizing the truth and the beauty of the world rather than you know, standing in the truth and being a benefit to the world rather than terrorizing the world? That's just what I got from it tonight. It's really cool.
That is a good way to look at it. Thank you, Carol. I love that perspective because once it comes back to ourselves. You know, what we bring out to the world. So if we can get clear on what we're ransoming in ourselves, how we kidnap ourselves, that has to have an effect in the world that's positive. That's brilliant. Thank you, Carol. Who else wants to share?
Can you hear me, Cliff?
Yes.
This is Jeffrey. I can speak to the spiritual practice. We just talked Wednesday at the Transcendental Meditation group meditation and meeting that someone had a question about what should I think about my practice if I sit down to meditate and 20 minutes later I realize I have not even picked up the mantra once. And the answer is you're still doing your practice because you realized what was going on. So that was pretty that was a revelation to that person and pretty important to the rest of us because it applies moment to moment as well. If I'm sitting down to meditate with a mantra and I recognize at some point that I'm thinking something other than the mantra, the practice is simply to place the attention back on the mantra. So what you were doing with your dog is exactly the same thing. If your attention is distracted by something, however enormous it might seem on the surface, the only action is to place the attention back on the spiritual practice, whatever that is. So I'm with you there.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That's right. That's what we do. We put our focus on our spiritual practice. That's what we do. And it is a powerful, powerful thing to do. It's not an airy-fairy thing. It's not like just sitting there going, "Oh, I'm in the midst of bullets." No, it is a powerful act proven time and time again by some of the most powerful people on the planet that when we get in that place of knowing, life shifts around us in ways we could have never even imagined. Enmity and civilian rise in Ukraine while attention is diverted. This obviously is about the Ukraine conflict and the airline that crashed and those who are getting killed daily there feeling like there's not enough attention being put on the conflict. And it made me think about how we get out of sight, out of mind, and distract ourselves with our internal conflicts. How easily we're willing to look at something else like either a sparkly thing, ooh, sparkly thing, or be diverted by somebody else's troubles and pay attention to that instead of our own. And so when I look at this, again, for me, this was a matter of looking back within myself. There are people there who are dying. How do I want to hold that? What do I want to see happen with that? There's a conflict over there where people are at war and killing each other. And I don't want to ignore it. I want to know how to hold it in spiritual principle so that I can help raise the consciousness of it above what it is. And then from that place, know what action I might take to support peace, which of course is what I want. And the first is always to know peace is possible. Because if I don't know that peace is possible, of course it's not. And then the second is to stand in that place where good must come of this. In the face of people dying, their homes being blown to bits. They were talking about apartment buildings just being blown to bits. There must be something that can be done. I loved what Mr. Rogers said about his mom telling him, look for the helpers. The Red Cross is there. There are people there doing what they can. And the more we can send that consciousness, the quicker that conflict will resolve. The quicker we can resolve the conflicts within ourselves and know our truth, the quicker that conflict will resolve. The quicker we can find peace, the quicker we can offer peace and create that consciousness of peace that clearly is needed in our world, but is firstly needed within ourselves. Who wants to weigh in? Well, Dave, what I heard you say is that you aren't sure how to work with the political conflict and get your head wrapped around all that goes on there. And what I would say to that is that if you look at it from that standpoint, you're right. It's really easy to get lost in it all. It's really easy to get lost in who's right and who's wrong and what's best. It's really easy to then take sides. And if we do that, I don't believe we're standing in spiritual principle. I believe that spiritual principle is when we rise above it, when we take a look at knowing that whatever the political implications are here, we hold that what's possible is that it can work for everyone. You know, the vision of the Centers for Spiritual Living is a world that works for everyone. And when we hold that vision as the higher good for whatever goes on there, we don't have to know the answer. I mean, we don't have to know what's the best political solution here. Right, Kaz is exactly right. We are about unification, not separation. It is hard to stand in that truth with what's going on in the world, but it's truth nonetheless. Well, that's exactly right. We stand in the possibility. We stand in the unlimited possibility of knowing that we may not know the exact answer of how they're going to resolve this, but we have to know that they're going to resolve it. We have to know it. Not how. Simply that they will resolve this thing. And the more of us who can stand in that place of knowing that they will resolve it will lead them to resolving it. The more of us that can stand in that place, that's how that comes about. Change happens in this world when more and more and more of us stand in a particular spot. And that spot we're standing in is peace and the possibility that they'll work this out. The same with our last story of the day. The fear between Israel and the Palestinians. It is so easy to take one side or the other. So easy to say one side is wrong and the other is right. And yet, if we do that, we have added to the conflict. Whenever we take sides, we have added to the conflict. The side we need to stand in is that, of course, peace is possible. Now, right now, the consciousness in the world is that peace is not possible in the East. That is the consciousness that rules what's happening there now, that peace is not possible. And so they will continue to fight as long as that is the consciousness that reigns supreme. But how many times in our own lives do we reach a place where we think something is impossible? The second we think anything in our lives is not possible, then it's not. It's always the first step. It always comes down to spiritual practice, spiritual principle, bringing into the toughest of moments. The more we can do that, the more our lives change, the more we can affect change in the world. Every one of us has the ability to stand in the truth. Every one of us. And the more that do so, things change. Life is evolving. Life is absolutely evolving. Our life, humanity's life, it is evolving. And we are here to evolve with it.